she remembers you.
Hello. Today I think it is time for a reboot. A reboot is a term, of course, that comes from our computer age, when we restart a computer and the operating system reboots, restarts, kicks in again. So we've ranged in our discussion over a number of topics. How do they all link to peace? So I'd like to take a few minutes today to link everything back to peace, because when we started this channel, we said it was dedicated to peace education and peacemaking. And as it turns out, it seems there are a lot of things that the would-be peace educator and peacemaker need to understand. There's a lot in a lot of subject areas that they need to get their minds around. We began with the first video, Peace Education, and we talked about the organisation ICR that is behind this, Interfaith Conflict Resolution, but we explained that there are 4 domains where peacemaking takes place, from the most interior to the most exterior domain. So there's within myself, between me and other individuals, and then there's me and the peacemaking effort, or the conflict resolution efforts that take place between members of my ideological or belief group. And then there are conflict resolutions that take place between one belief group and another belief group. And we saw this on a big scale. It could be between world religions, world civilizations. But the principles of peace education and peacemaking hold whether we're applying them at a micro level or a macro level. That is the premise of this work. Then we talked about the roots of conflict, and we saw that as human beings we have a consciousness of being different from each other. And those differences, if they're not managed properly, can lead to conflicts. Now, it's important to own conflicts, I said before, and not just to leave them buried. It's important to have an understanding of where conflicts arise. They arise from our lower nature, if you like, our carnal nature, which registers difference, but then it competes. It's very competitive. It might compete for someone's affection. There might be 2 people competing for someone's affection. There might be 2 countries competing to control land or scarce resources.
Ego.
Ego is at the basis of it. There might be people competing in the job market for the one job. Now, when there is conflict, I've suggested that there are processes that we can engage in that can help work our way through the conflict. And some of those processes are active listening, where we listen fully with our hearts and our minds and our whole being and try to understand where the other is coming from. So in other words, the peacemaker has to think, speak and listen with great vigilance, more diligently than the average person. We need to cultivate empathy to be a peacemaker. And that is the emotional bond between ourselves and another. Because unless we can, at an emotional level, identify with the other side, with our opponent, with our enemy, then we really can't apprehend the coordinates of peace. So part of the art, or certainly one of the processes of peacemaking, of conflict resolution, is to use I statements. These are, this technique has been around for a long time. When we own a conflict, it's important to say how we perceive it without blaming the other party. Because once we get into the blame game, we make it impossible to build that bridge. The blame game comes about because of a psychological process called projection. And we've talked about projection and violence, attack and defense. Wherever we see fighting in the world today, wherever we see bombs being dropped and missiles being fired, it's because the parties that initiated it believe that they are dealing with an enemy that is not on their level. That's why we talked about equality. And what's more, that they've projected all of the objectionable traits in our humanity onto the other side, or the relevant objectionable traits onto the other side, to justify why they should attack. And that's where we would inevitably end up, at violence and with justifications for violence and killing one another, unless some higher influence and higher principle kicks into our normal competitive energy system. What Belinda called ego is part and parcel of being a stranger to oneself, because then we got on to talking about the conscious and the unconscious. There's part of the mind which has to do with the known and part to do with the unknown. So in that unknown part, there are things that we don't want to have to admit about ourselves. You could think of that as the subconscious. They're beneath the threshold of consciousness, because if we were truly honest with ourselves, we'd find a lot more carnal and bestial impulses motivating us, destructive impulses motivating us, than we would care to admit. They're in the subconscious, lots of destructive impulses. So a peacemaker has to cultivate awareness of the subconscious and the superconscious, one's higher angels, which inspire cooperation. So the subconscious impulses actuating our competition, and the superconscious impulses which inspire cooperative, collaborative, purposeful action in the world. Both subconscious and superconscious are aspects of the unconscious. So the peacemaker needs to be a meditator. We talked about meditation, which is opening the conscious mind to the unconscious. So you can go back and have a listen to that. Because unless we get a handle on the unconscious somehow and shift our sense of identity from this fragile ego, which doesn't know that it's not only that the self is far more than just the known. It's the known and the unknown in relation to each other. And when we understand this, there's an identity shift from the ego to what you might call your true authentic self. So the peacemaker has to practice meditation, and the peacemaker has to practice contentment. Everybody around us is practicing discontentment and disgruntlement. And that is leading to a lot of the motivations that are destroying the world. We're not happy with what is. So the peacemaker has to come from a place of contentment. We talked about peace being a presence and not an absence. It's not simply the temporary pause between two breaks of violence. Because whenever we're engaged in destruction, we'll eventually reach a point of exhaustion and a point of limitation. We're running up against limitation, we're running up against opposition. Our military resources may be dwindling. Our human energy may be dwindling. We might not have the stomach for any more fighting. And then we have a truce. Now, just that pause in the fighting does not constitute peace, because peace is a presence. It's like the rainbow. If we use the symbol of the rainbow, white light can be broken through a prism or through water drops in our atmosphere and be shown to consist of 7 colours. It's rich. It's got these 7 colours in it. And similarly, the presence, which is peace, contains these differentiated virtues. There is no peace, for example, without forgiveness. That means that the peacemaker needs to understand the process of retention of grievance, of resentment, how to let go, how to forgive, and how to love one's enemy. We talked about that. So there's no peacemaking without forgiveness. There's no peacemaking without a sense of equality, so that we don't demonize the other and we don't engage in projection and in claiming that our self-defense, claiming that our attacks are a form of self-defense, which is mere justification or rationalization so much of the time. Remember, I said that I'm not trying to dismiss the idea of authentic self-defense in certain situations, but most of the time, when we invoke defense, self-defense, it's a rationalization for an attack. And there's no peacemaking without justice, without fairness. So if you're trammeling on people's rights, there can't be authentic peacemaking. That's why we did the video on rights and duties and religious freedom, because the foundational freedom of all the other freedoms we argued was religious freedom. And people need to be free to be at peace. They need to feel that they are free from attack and free from coercion. Therefore, the peacemaker who doesn't do a deep dive into human freedom and the defense of it through rights, which are inalienable, we're born with these rights. They're not granted to us by outside authorities. The peacemaker who doesn't do a deep dive into that will be severely hampered in their efforts at peacemaking. So, because peace education and peacemaking have so much to do with the unconscious and the conscious and their relationship, we ended up talking about meditation in some videos. And meditation led us to an understanding of knowledge and of creativity. Knowledge was defined, or the proposed definition was the marriage of wisdom and understanding. And wisdom is that faculty in us that is able to discern the will, the creative power of the universe, and know its movement in our lives. And understanding had to do with our ability to recognize it in other people's lives and to recognize it in the work of others that have gone before, and to recognize it in work that's been published, work that's been done down through the ages, and to be able to make those linkages. So we talked a little bit about creativity and work. And when we talked about work, I said that the work that we're talking about, and this was in one of the most, in in one of the recent videos, the work that we're talking about here on this channel is the work that you are born to do, not the work that you feel that you have to do to make ends meet. It's not a meaningless job, but it should bring you a sense of fulfillment. And something that brings you a sense of fulfillment will not be a grudging task. It will be effortless, and it will join your energies to the creative energies of the universe. Now, this can't happen if you're ignorant of all of these psychological dynamics that we've been talking about. So for most people, work unfortunately stands in the way of understanding the principles of peacemaking. Because if the only work they've ever known is the sense of compulsion for survival, I need to have this job, then their understanding of work and of jobs is that jobs are something that are on offer by the government or by corporations or outside institutions and organisations, like they're apples that grow on trees and you can pick them and you compete for these jobs. And if there's an unemployment crisis, then the solution that everybody clamours for seems to be government, create more jobs, businesses, create more jobs, offer us some jobs, otherwise we're idle. But that's not the work I'm talking about. If that's the only work that there is on the planet, it bodes very poorly for peacemaking, because it doesn't allow for full human flourishing nor full contentment. Because the work that I talked about in the previous video is something that spontaneously wells up. It comes from the fact that we are volitional beings and goal-orientated beings. We're not exclusively that, but that's an aspect of our being. And because of that, we can choose actions to bring our values into the world. Values and creations that embody the good, the true, and the beautiful. We can bring them in, we can manifest them in the world. And as I say, if we're doing it right, it should be a joy to do it. And sadly, a lot of people don't experience the joy in their work. And this is not unrelated to peace, it is integrally related to peace. Creativity, work, knowledge, how to apply our knowledge, and so on. So that is a little bit of a linking back of the issues that we've dealt with in recent videos to peace. And periodically we'll have to do a peace reboot just to link back everything we've been talking on to the main issue and the raison d'etre of this channel, which is peace education and peacemaking. Thank you.